Come on without, come on within. You ain't seen nothing like the mighty Quinn. No, we're not here to talk about an Irish Inuit, although we are going to talk about a band who wrote a song about that Irish Inuit. Hello, this is Professor Matt, and welcome to another episode of Don't Go Out Onto the Moors, the podcast where we examine British genre cinema as a way to explore, examine, interrogate cultural, social, political, economic changes, not just in 20th century Britain, but really the 20th century world. Uh, and tonight we're covering a film which kind of straddles that. Dina's pick, Venus and Furs from 1969, directed by one of a director that I have a fondness for, one Jess Franco. But before we get into that, let's introduce the usual crew. And by the way, Happy New Year, all, because this is the first time we've recorded since this end of the new year. Well, let's get started real quick. Paul, how are you doing, man? What is good in this world?
I'm doing okay. I'm talking to everyone here from my kitchen. The lighting's a little weird because it looks like there's something breaking through the ceiling. But otherwise, yeah, no, I'm doing all right. Excited to talk about this extremely strange films. But thank you all for having me.
And Dina, how have you been?
I've been good. Same old, same old. Yeah.
Okay, so before I turn it back over to Dina, because this is her pick, just two things of, I guess, podcast business. First is we kind of have a schedule for most of this year. This month, which is February, we're going to be talking about Franco's Venus and Furs. When we next meet in April, it's going to be my pick, and we're going to do something, well, kind of completely different. We're going to do a comedy dealing with labor unions, geez, soccer, called I'm All Right, Jack, with Peter Sellers. So, which is getting a brand new Blu-ray release next month. So, sort of fits. Uh, and then right in the summer, in June and August, we're going to have two guests. My man, Troy Gwynn from the Nashi cast is going to come on in June, and we're going to go back to familiar territory, I guess, with, to use Paul's words, another kind of crazy film, Vampire Circus, which is one of the better 70s Hammer films. Right. And then in August, a dear, dear friend of mine, and Dina, I know you've met her, uh, Jen Fowler, aka Clown Baby Jen, uh, who is not just an awesome human being, but also one of the most talented artists I know. She'll be coming on to talk about probably one of maybe her favorite film, which is the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So, part of this podcast was to, explore British genre cinema, but not just do Hammer, do things kind of outside the boxy as well. I think we're meeting that quota. So that's pretty cool. The other thing I wanted to mention isn't really so much about the podcast, although who knows, it might be a podcast episode at some point. When me and Paul were last on for Cash on Demand, it was announced that Hammer had bought the rights to some of their older catalog and they're releasing that on Blu-ray. But they also bought the rights, at least in Britain, but if you have a region free player like me, that's not a problem. The rights to other quote unquote important British exploitation films. And so had released the first title of that series, uh, The Cry of the Banshee with Vincent Price. They released the title of the second one last week, and it's 1971's Crucible of Horror, with Homeboys in it. I'm sorry, I'm coming off a head cold. Homeboy. I can picture him. Michael Goth. Michael Goth is in it. And I haven't seen this film in years. And it's been available in the United States, but on pretty not so great prints. So it'll be cool to actually see it in a cleaned up print. And who knows, that might be something we want to tackle at some point. I mean, Michael Goth losing his goddamn mind, like peak early 70s Michael Goth, is a joy to behold. So that might be something we'd be interested in, or you, lovely audience, might be interested in. So, Dina, this is your pick. And when you initially threw this at me, I was a little apprehensive because I was like, is this really even a British film? Because, right, there's some British elements, but it's filmed primarily in Istanbul and Italy. There's also scenes in Brazil, but they were not filmed for this movie. We'll talk more about that. Uh, but then I thought about this and I was like, nah, fuck yes. Fuck yes, this is. And it is because British financing and the soundtrack, which we're going to talk about, features Manfred Mann. So it's British enough for me. And right, I mean, as a devotee of Jess Franco, this is probably my favorite Franco film. And so
All right.
any excuse to talk about this film amongst people I love, that's a bonus. Uh, Dina, this is your pick. Why did
Yes.
you choose this movie?
Well, so I'm super jealous that Jen's doing Rocky Horror because that's also one of my favorites and one of the movies that I thought about when I was watching this because I felt like the theme to me was a quote from Rocky Horror, which is give yourself over to absolute pleasure. And that's exactly what it reminded me of. So, all like, but I love Rocky Horror. It's a love letter to these kind of movies, right? So that's cool. I picked Venus and Furs because I actually don't like Jess Franco. I'm not that big of a fan.
Okay. Well,
I
we'll
I
we'll
will
talk
admit,
about Jess and
yeah, he's
why.
not my guy.
Yeah.
I don't hate him. And unpopular opinion, I like his early stuff from the 60s, the very like almost like Edgar Allan Poe, Vincent Pricey type of stuff. When you get into like his sexploitation movies, I lose a little bit of interest, but I do like Venus and Furs. I like it a lot. I like the soundtrack. I think the soundtrack's amazing. The jazzy pianos, the like psychedelic sitar stuff. It's fucking awesome. It speaks to me on many levels. Yeah, and I mean, I like the story. It's based on a novel. And can you say
Very
his name for
loose.
me so I
I
don't
have
fuck it up?
I have it down here. Leopold von Schaken Maschus.
Okay, yeah, that's essentially what I thought. Which we would know as sadomasochism, and
Yeah.
that's a big element of the movie. So without like giving you a summary of it, but Venus and Furs is a movie about a jazz musician who becomes obsessed with a mysterious woman that he finds dead, also dressed in fur, on the beach. Also very reminiscent of Twin Peaks, which we just recently rewatched too. So it's
It's
like
funny, I
cool.
have that down in my notes.
Yeah.
Well, I was like,
So
man,
yeah, exactly. So you kind of covered the British aspects of it. So Harry Allen Towers of Towers of London Productions, which that's a fucking amazing name. Like I mean, it's just so good. How could you how could you not take advantage of that? So it's my understanding that it was produced in Britain to not necessarily avoid taxes, but there was some kind of
eh,
tax scheme
so Harry
happening.
Allen, first of all, this film is a British, Italian, West German co-production directed by a Spanish man in exile. So this is actually about this might be the most cosmopolitan film we ever cover on this podcast, guys. Uh,
Okay.
Harry Allen Towers was an interesting dude. He was a producer based out of the UK, and he really got big in the 1960s because he got on the bandwagon doing international co-productions. He realized that you could make a film with some serious talent and some really kick-ass locations. And the location work in this film, I think, is really quite.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the highlights for me too. I mean, it's amazing.
You could make movies, uh, but also, as you mentioned, kind of dodge British taxes. And I guess this is a weird segue into what we're going to be talking about next go around, British labor unions. So he set up a lot of these international co-productions beginning in the 60s. These co-productions were with continental Europe, so Italy, West Germany, Spain, Ireland. The first two Christopher Lee Fu Manchu films, which he produced, were filmed in Dublin, partially because tax related stuff, and also because Dublin looked a hell of a lot more like early 1920s London than London did in the mid 60s. Right? Structural underdevelopment, by the way. Bulgaria, which I thought was really cool because he had to be one of the first Western producers. Western film companies were already going into Yugoslavia by that point, but Yugoslavia was kind of weird. They were kind of like the loose socialist dictatorship in Eastern Europe. Bulgaria, not so much. So like he had to be one of the first Western producers doing stuff in Bulgaria. South Africa, which is the absolute other end of the political spectrum than Bulgaria at that time. Hong Kong, makes sense. Also, Fu Manchu. And right, Latin America, in particular, Brazil, which shows up in this film, even though most of the cast and crew never went there. Uh, he's probably best known for those five Fu Manchu films he did with Christopher Lee, which vary incredibly in quality. I will still stand by the first two. It's a little difficult watching Christopher Lee yellowed up, but
Yeah,
he
it's
does,
rough.
but he plays the character not as a stereotype, and the, again, the first two films I'll still swear by. A lot of his films, almost all of them towards the end, also starred or co-starred his then wife, Maria Rome, who plays said Venus in Furs in the film. But he was kind of a weird guy. He was kind of a dodgy guy. Did either of you in your research come across the fact like uh, he was arrested and charged for like vice related stuff in New York City.
Did you say vice related
Vice
stuff?
related stuff. So if the FBI is to be believed, which maybe not so much, he rolled with guys like Peter Lawford and
Say no more.
yeah, but also apparently the KGB.
Cool.
The FBI was convinced that he was actually a Soviet secret agent, which maybe that's why he was able to film in Bulgaria. I don't know. Uh, but he's a dude of note, and his fingerprints were on a lot of genre films in the 60s and the early 70s. And in a way, he's kind of the guy who really sort of launches the film's director, writer, Jess Franco onto kind of the global stage. Dina, you're not the hugest Jess Franco fan.
No, I'm not.
Oh, what is your experience with Jess Franco? I think we watched Vampiros Lesbos many, many moons ago, high
Many
off
moons
our
ago.
ass at my old, like the old crib.
That's
Yes,
that, that
yeah.
that's primarily my extent with Jess Franco here, where yeah, I remember that being very again similar thematically, where there's a very very loose story with a lot of
I,
just
I, I prefer the term non-linear.
yeah,
Loose
no, that's
is
true. It
really
was really
good.
not.
That's definitely what it is.
It did start with like the end, so to speak, of like this is what happens. This is how this happened. Let's take you back and there's like a blurring of like what's reality and what's a dream sequence,
Mhm.
and that was very similar with this film. So besides the lesbian vampire, no, I didn't have much experience with Franco. Otherwise, he didn't do he didn't do Django, right?
No, no, that's Sergio Corbucci.
Sure. Okay. Right. All right.
Sergio Corbucci. So Jess Franco's a really interesting guy, and a guy with a first and last name that probably sums up 20th century Spanish history. Uh, Jesus,
Jesus, Franco.
Jesus and Franco. If you want to know about 20th century Spain, you got to know about Jesus and you got to know about Franco. Uh, he, over the course of 4 decades, wrote, directed, produced, and acted because he shows the F up in a lot of his movies, including this one, in something like over 173 films. Some of them are quite good, including the film we're talking about. Some of them, not so goddamn good. Uh, he gets his start, and I know, Dina, you prefer a lot of his earlier work. He
Yeah.
got his start actually in Paris. Now he's in France because he wants to make his kind of movies, but you can't make his kind of movies in Franco's Spain. Which, incidentally, in honor of Jess Franco, Spanish beard this evening. Uh, so in 1962, him and a few guys who owned a French company, which looms large in genre cinema, called Eurocine, went to see Hammer's. See, all roads lead back to Hammer. Hammer's The Brides of Dracula. And they came out of the film very impressed. But Jesus Franco, being Jesus Franco, was like, yo, man, I can make that movie better and cheaper. And so what you got was The Awful Dr. Orloff from 1962, which is a really tight little black and white kind of gutter trash riff on Eyes Without a Face, right? It's taking the basic plot line of Eyes Without a Face and kind of revving up the violence, revving up the sleaze, revving up the sex. He does some other good films in continental Europe in the 60s, but it's when him and Harry Alan Towers hook up in the mid 60s where I think a lot of English language audiences got to know him. And just a list of the films he did with Towers: 99 Women, which is one of the, I'm not a big fan of women in prison films, but 99 Women is one of the better women in prison films. The Girl from Rio, which is a batshit crazy movie. Venus and Furs, which we're going to be talking about tonight. The last two Christopher Lee Fu Manchu films, which are not very good. Uh, Justine and Eugenie, both riffs off of the works of Marquis de Sade, uh, which have their moments. The Jack Palance scene from Justine is is sight to behold. And also in Eugenie, if you ever want to see Christopher Lee in a smoking jacket with sexy women like rubbing themselves against him, go see Eugenie. Uh, The Bloody Judge, also with Christopher Lee, which is actually a lot better than its reputation would suggest. It's not just a ripoff of Witchfinder General. And also Count Dracula with Lee, Klaus Kinski, Herbert Lom, which is actually one of the more faithful adaptations of Stoker's novel.
That's
There's
a
some
good.
really,
I've seen that version. Then I didn't know he did that. That's a great.
yeah, there's
Yeah, it's a
some
great
really
version.
good things in that movie, but that movie's a wonderful microcosm of everything that can be good about Jesus Franco and everything that could be potentially bad.
There is like scenes where suddenly like people are naked.
So
Yeah.
Franco had a very, let's say, eclectic editing style. Uh, and I have a theory why that is. He really liked handheld cameras. And when it works, it works. When it doesn't work and he just like is, I'm gonna shock and awe you with zoom shots, it can get a little jarring. And one of the strengths of Franco, and this film certainly speaks to that, is that he always had his own little troupe of trusted actors. For whatever reason, people liked working with him. So Howard Vernon, who was in The Awful Dr. Orloff, he's in a bunch of his movies. Christopher Lee, Klaus Kinski, who we'll talk about tonight, right? Uh, Soledad, Soledad Mandera, a whole bunch of people. So that's a strength, but part of the negative is he had this tendency to film while filming. So he'd be making a film, but because he'd get bored real easily, he was always thinking about or moving on to the next film. So Howard Vernon, who he used a lot, like eventually approached him about this years later because he went to see a movie in the cinema and then came out and he was like, I wasn't in this fucking thing. I don't think I was paid to be in this thing. Jess, what the fuck, man? And Jess was like, oh, I filmed your scenes when we were filming that other film together. And he was like, okay. Uh, and in that version of Dracula, you kind of see that. There's some really good stuff, but then there's inexplicably this one scene where it's like stuffed animals come to life. And there's no real explanation for that. There were some rumors that they ran out of money. That's why Herbert Lom's in a wheelchair at the end of the film because he has a stroke, which you don't know about at some point. But, so it was with Harry Allen Towers that, he first started getting exposed to a larger audience. Uh, and for me, this association with Towers begins. So I slightly disagree with you, Dina. I like his
Mhm.
earlier stuff. For me, my sweet spot with Franco is his late 60s to like mid 70s stuff when he had slightly higher budgets and was given a little bit more freedom. Now, with that freedom also came more inexplicable nudity, but it also allowed him to explore different themes in different ways. Uh, I always say there are like four eons of Franco. There's the early stuff. There's the stuff from this period to about the mid 70s that includes stuff like Vampiros Lesbos, Virgin Amongst the Living Dead. As far as I'm concerned, his best stuff. Then he does some stuff in the early 80s that's all over the place. Some of it is very good, but a lot of it is hella fucking pornographic. And two things can be right at the same time. By the way, if you want to subject or introduce your significant other to Jess Franco, the early stuff that Dino likes and this film are probably safe bets.
Yeah.
His later stuff, maybe not so much, because me and Marie sat down, Christ, a couple months ago, and I finally broke down and I bought the Severin Blu-ray for Macumba Sexual, or
Well,
as
that's the one that I was
or as
gonna
my
bring
wife,
up.
we love you, Marie, referred to it as Matumbo Sexual, which is hysterical on so many goddamn levels. You guys know the whole sex Matumbo thing, right?
I don't.
Oh dear God. So Dikembe Mutombo, who the NBA fans in the house will know, maybe one of the best defensive players ever. He was the guy who took over for me and Justin's boy, Patrick Ewing, at Georgetown in the late 80s.
Oh,
So he
okay.
was from Zaire, now the Congo. And he was this like 7'2" francophone African guy that sounded like the Cookie Monster. So when he got to Georgetown, his English wasn't that great. So his teammates taught him English and I
Mhm.
guess how to like interact. So Mutombo was notorious for going to bars in the DC area and he would walk in again. It's this like 7'2" guy. And he would just be like, who wants to sex Mutombo? Right. So, that became sort of legendary. So when she was like Matumbo sexual, I thought that was beyond funny. That film, which is weirdly, this is another thing Franco did. He would remake earlier films he did. So
Mhm.
Matumbo Sexual is kind of a remake of Vampiros Lesbos. And I had seen it years ago and I remember liking it. So yeah, we turned it on
So
and
Macumba Sexual is like it's cool because there's a trans actress, right? Like
Yes,
that's very ahead of its time.
way
And
ahead of
on
its
top of
time.
being trans, she's also black, right? So on top, like those two things are so ahead of its time, so cool. And there is a naturalness in the movie. It doesn't feel like you're not pandering to anybody by including this person. Um, and I think that's really cool. What my issue with Jess Franco and his later stuff is, and this is like, I'm not a prude, but I don't really need to watch
So
movies
that was
about
it. I
like
had to
just like him watching his wife have sex with whoever,
I had to shut
however many ways,
I
and it's just not interesting to me.
I
It's
had
not even that it's not good. I'm not saying that. I
I
just
had
don't
to
find it
shut the
interesting.
film off because it got really uncomfortable, and I was like, I'm sorry, I forgot how pornographic this film
I
was.
literally just told Justin that I was like in Macumba Sexual. I watched what's his wife's name? Lena?
Lena Romay. Lena
Lena
Romay.
Romay. I watched Lena Romay just like performing oral on this other woman for about 30 minutes. And I'm
Yes.
like, okay, can we move
The
on?
sex scenes linger. They are long.
They linger. Yeah.
And it's so weird because I step up to the plate for some of his early 80s stuff, but I'm also like the mix of art and tasteful erotic and full-on porno really starts to get out of whack there. And then that final phase, which is like the mid 80s to his death, it's pretty much all porno and really weird like direct to like
Well,
VHS.
and that seems like the same kind of like professional journey that Jean Roland went on to, right?
That's true, but also not true.
Yeah.
Roland, to his, he was always very open about this. He was like, I would do the porno so that I could
Yeah.
make money, so I could make the sort of weird art house horror film that I really wanted to make. In the
Yeah.
case of Franco, I think he was just addicted to filming, and so he'd film goddamn anything. Which when he was plugged in, when he had a budget, when he had a producer who I think could kind of rein him in a little bit, he was capable of some really great stuff. When he wasn't really any of those things, it was just, I'll throw things together. And again, there comes a point where it's like, how many sex scenes with my wife can I film? You know,
Yeah. It's
on
just
this
that's all
budget.
right.
It does get a little weird. Uh, for people who are unexperienced with Franco or, want to sort of understand the language of his cinema, there's four things that sum his cinema up. Jazz, he was a huge jazz fan. And, Paul, going back to what you said about the kind of non-linear narratives of his movies, I think that's because his films are like free flow jazz. There isn't an easy beginning or an easy end. Dreams, ditto. We'll talk about that. Sex, and again, maybe being Spanish at the time he grew up might explain a lot of that because in Spain under the other Franco, and by the way, if you want to listen more about this, check out me and Dina Short on Spanish films. You couldn't speak about sex. Like it was verboten. And violence, which again, I kind of wonder, is that also a byproduct of him being Spanish and being Spanish at that time? Because look, Franco Spain was born through totalizing violence, but once the Spanish Civil War was over, you couldn't, violence was everywhere. You couldn't address it, you know? So this obsession with sex and violence, uh, needless to say, his films are all over the place. But the one that we're going to be talking about is, for my money, one of his best. Does anyone want to add anything about Dear Uncle Jess before we move on to the genesis of this film and talk a little bit about the cast?
I think I'm good.
So, the title is based off of the novel, uh, which got a kind of weird second afterlife in the late 60s. Hippies, man, hippies. Uh, right. So, the film is it takes its title from the novel. It takes the female lead's name, Wanda, from the novel. It takes notions of masochism, BDSM, female dominance from the novel. But if you read the novel and then you watch this is not the novel.
Yeah.
The themes are there, but it is not a straight doing of the novel. It's there's some question about how exactly this film became this film. And I don't know who's right. There seems to be a lot of BS. Franco claimed that the inspiration came to him when he was hanging out with jazz musician Chet Baker. And Chet Baker apparently said, talking about when he's playing piano, the trumpet, it was like floating away from reality uh, when he was performing. And this notion of floating away from reality became the basis of the film. Harry Allen Towers and other people involved have a very different story. The novel was very popular with young people, and they were like, okay, word. If we get some Italian money, we get some West German money, we get the Spanish mercenary guy who likes to film shit anyway, we can make a movie. And so I don't know exactly what is right. And even the credits are mysterious. The Italian credits, which right there's a separate Italian version which we may never see. More about that in a little bit. Also credit the German sex comedy director Hans Billion with the script. Now, whether that's true, whether that's bullshit, I have no idea. But so there seems to be the genesis of this film seems to be rather mysterious. Uh, what we do know is that the James Darren character, the male protagonist, was originally supposed to be, cast as an African American, and the film original title was Black Angel, but Darren was cast. Well, we'll get into that in a second, because he was a name. The film started shooting in the 1st of October 1968 and was filmed in Rome, Marbella, Barcelona, and Istanbul. There are also scenes, particularly of the Carnival in Rio. They did not go to Brazil to film this movie. Franco filmed those scenes while filming one of the Fu Manchu films because he loved to film everything. And so, he just inserted that into the film itself. So, what I want to do real quick now is just go over the cast and, talk a little bit about the film's release and reception. And then we can dive into, what you guys thought about the film, what we should take away from it. Uh, the cast is pretty freaking strong. You have James Darren as Jimmy, and you guys, you're hip to James Darren, right? You've seen him in other things.
He's
Yeah.
in the Gigit, right?
Exactly. He was
Yeah,
kind of in the Tina Bopper movies in the mid 60s. And then,
Oh, yeah, he's from Philly too, isn't he?
yeah, he's from South
that's
Philly.
right. Yeah,
He's a Philly kid. Right. And so he's in Gidget, and like by the end of the 60s, he's like, fuck this. I want to do like adult things. So when Harry Allen Towers was like, hey, we're gonna film this kind of crazy psychedelic, sort of film in Europe, he was like, sure. You have Barbara McNair as Rita, right? Jimmy's sort of one part of Jimmy's love triangle. Maria Ram as Wanda, who, was the producer's wife. Klaus Kinski as Ahmed Kadori. And I sent this screen grab to the group text. Klaus Kinski turban settings. Uh, Klaus Kinski, we can probably say this here. Klaus Kinski was a piece of shit human being. But he was an incredibly talented and incredibly versatile actor who was in all kinds of genre stuff, ranging from horror films to spaghetti westerns to obviously the sort of art house stuff that he did with Werner Herzog. One of the most interesting things, and Paul, I'm looking at you because I have to thank you for pointing out that this ever existed. Dina, are you familiar with Klaus Kinski's weird one-man show when he's Jesus?
Actually, yeah, because we watched My Best Fiend not that long
Okay.
ago.
Oh, great.
Uh, he's a madman.
Yeah,
He's fucking
absolutely,
crazy. I
absolutely
love him, but he's fucking crazy.
absolutely
Yeah.
out of his mind. Again,
Yeah.
not particularly a great dude, but a very good actor and part of, again, Franco's sort of team. Dennis Price as the art dealer Cap. We'll be seeing him next month because he was a British actor who got started mainly in comedy in the 50s, but then started doing weird genre films in Europe for directors like Franco and, various Italian directors. And he also was in a couple Hammer films. He was a closeted homosexual, so that was an issue. He was also an alcoholic. And so by the late 60s, he was kind of unhireable in Britain. So he'd do contract work in Europe in these low budget pictures. Margaret Lee as Olga. I know her mostly from Euro spy films from the period. Uh, and then Paul Mueller as Herman, the club owner, who was also in a bunch of Franco stuff, including Vampiros Lesbos. The guy who dubs his voice is remarkably strange. Uh, and then, right, there's two uncredited appearances or members of the cast. There's Uncle Jess there jamming out with the band, and you get Manfred Mann. They are here. They are in the film. Uh so the film was shot in 68. It was released in Italy in August 69 in a 92-minute version. It was then edited down and released by American International Pictures in May of 1970, so a year later. Uh, One of the reasons Towers did a lot of, co-productions was because this was at a time when British censorship was starting to loosen, but you could always get away with more on the continent, right? But this film ran into a lot of censorship problems, particularly in Italy. Did you guys read anything about this? So in 1971, a Bologna court sentenced Klaus Kinski, Lee, and the producers to 3 months in jail and a 40,000 lira fine for complicity in an obscene spectacle. I
Yeah, I
don't
saw
know
that.
whether the fine was paid. I know because I did some digging on this. Klinsky just didn't show the fuck up. He just bailed on the whole process. Right, which is very Kinski of him. And right, the film was confiscated in Italy. Uh the reception of the film at the time, the contemporary reviews are negative as shit. But beginning, I think in the 1980s and 1990s, particularly when Franco's stuff started to get revisited by film scholars like Stephen Thrower, etc. This one has come out as kind of it's regarded as one of Franco's best, and I would agree with that. Uh, what print did you guys watch? Was it the one that I sent you, or
Yes, the one you said.
okay?
I watched whatever Justin downloaded for me.
So that's probably so in 2005 Blue Underground released the film on DVD. Uh but it's not the complete film. It's an 86-minute English language version, which isn't the AIP cut that was released on drive-ins in the States, but it's
Hmm.
also not the 92-minute Italian cut either.
Okay.
And my understanding, because I was talking to someone who we may have on the podcast at some point who is a big devotee of the Franco. And I was bemoaning the fact, why isn't this on Blu-ray? Or, we have a restored version. We may never get that because the original film negatives are like straight up missing in action. They are MI effing A. And so the print that you guys watched is probably the best we're ever going to have, unfortunately. Which is good. It's a decent print, but it's a shame, it's there's not we can't aspire to anything better. So, do you guys want to add anything about the cast or the crew, or do we
I
want
don't
to just
think
get
so.
right into it? So, in my sort of master notes, I had four, well, actually five sort of separate things. The international, the internationalization of particularly British cinema at this time, the soundtrack, counterculture, Franco, sex dreams, jazz and violence, and then weirdly enough, feminism. Because I actually think this is actually a feminist film, and a lot of Franco's better stuff has lots of feminist themes. So, who would like to kick us off on what?
Um, oh, sorry, this is not this. Um, so I don't know if I would call it a feminist movie.
All right.
Um, I'm not saying it's not feminist or that it is, you know what I mean? Like I feel like
Well, let me rephrase.
I have a hard time like calling something feminist when I feel like the only point of the woman in the story is sexual gratification. And on both of their parts, like I love the whole, I do. So trying, like, when I was watching it, I was trying to find, like, sincerely what I would view as like a feminist theme in the movie. And the whole concept of the master and the slave in the beginning being the master is the woman, the slave is the man, and then it gets flipped at the end
Yes.
and it's changed. And that role as
Radically.
master, that role as the one who dominates has changed and it's no longer the woman. I
So,
also feel like I mean they're relate like the Twin Peaks thing, right? Like going back to the like he's he's romanticizing, obsessed, like sexualizing a dead body and a woman's dead body. And I struggle finding feminism in something like that. So that's where my my criticism lies.
maybe I should reframe that or rephrase that, but so the master slave dynamic and then the subversion of that is, I think, really key. And for me, there's also, and it's funny, this is something that runs through a lot of my favorite Franco films. The whole menace of a woman who has been wronged. You see it in this film, you see it in The Diabolical Dr. Z, you see it in She Killed in Ecstasy, you see it in Vampiros
Hmm.
Lesbos. That's something I think. So usually in a lot of mainstream reviews of Franco stuff, usually by people that's never actually sat through a Franco film, it's, oh, he's this dirty old man. That is true. He is a dirty ass old man, but he's a lot more than, I think, just a dirty old man. And some of what he
So,
has.
can I interrupt you really quick? I think what makes Jess Franco a dirty old man is filming his wife having sex, his real life wife having sex with anybody and everybody. That's what makes him a dirty old man. Venus and Furs doesn't make him a dirty old man to me. I do think that the counterculture, the whole 60s free love thing, I do think it's cool. I do think that's feminist. I think that's progressive and I agree with all that and I love it. Um, but I don't think that it being inherently about women's sexuality makes it like, I don't think it's anti-feminist. I don't even think it's misogynistic. I just
That's
don't know if it's doing
maybe,
anything or if
maybe
it's
that
talking about of women's liberation or sexual liberation. I don't feel like that's the point of the movie. That's not what I took from it.
I I would agree with that, but I think those sort of elements are there. But it's also there with, hey, this is an exploitation film. Women gonna take their clothes off, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that's the thing with Franco. These things exist in his films, particularly his good films, very, very at times uncomfortably. Like they shouldn't fit together. So I can certainly understand that. Paul, did you have anything to say on this particular point or
Um, I would agree with Dina that it's not necessarily a strongly feminist film, and it's not entirely misogynistic, but it is about power relations, and it's definitely these male-dominated worlds that this woman's floating through, just being something. She's not totally present as a person. I feel like she's more present as like almost furniture. She's just there. She's something for the eyes, and it's very presented in that way. But she does get her quote vengeance, and there is
I
some
was about to
comeuppance, but it's still like there's still this lingering thing of like with Darren's character, he's just, it seems like he's just along for the ride. Like, and he's just kind of floating through this. He's like, oh, she's dead. All right. Like, and it's odd in that way. So I feel like Franco, I not known very much about him in his personal life, but him hanging around someone like Chet Baker, he clearly hung around with these characters that were very like extraordinarily complicated and like troubled, and so I feel like he was trying to project some sort of message in that, but it just came out, to me at least, it came out very like watery. I was just like, oh, all right, but I think his, and this was a very common trope in the 60s, especially with experimental film, with like the whole like dream world. Oh, is this real? Is it not? It's kind of, and especially the emphasis on like fascination with like uh, uh, Asian or South Asian like religion and
the East.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yes, the
the
East, like
East. Yeah.
it had a lot of those tropes in it. So there's a part of me that makes me feel a bit like maybe in one way Franco was trying to be subversive, but like I don't know if it like clearly made the mark for me. But it was I mean, yeah. That's what I'll say about that.
Yeah, I again I think what you it these things are very uncomfortably existing together because did he set out to make I should probably again rephrase that. Did he set out to make sort of a feminist opus here? Hell no.
No.
This is a commercial genre film where he could just monkey around. But again, in a lot of his better films, these these sort of themes of like weird subversion of patriarchal systems and power relations and like weird female empowerment, but female empowerment that also goes hand in hand with close up zoom shots of Bush.
Well, that's the other thing too,
Yeah,
right? Because female empowerment in so many films or movies, it always is the sexual aspect of it. It's never anything else.
and in
And I
Franco
think that's the frustrating
and in
part about it.
Franco cinema, it is always this sort of sexual aspect of it because the wronged female always has to use their sexuality to
Exactly.
right these wrongs.
Well,
Uh,
and there was this other part of the like early on in the movie, just going back to the like kind of free love 60s stuff, right? That made me laugh. When he first like meets her and he like kind of follows her and he says right out the door, he's like, I want to go to bed with you. And she's like fucking James Bond, like James Bond. Like it
Yes.
was like very James Bond to me, where it's like, yeah, we're two adults in the 60s, we're gonna do this and everything's gonna be fine and no strings attached and it's free love, baby. I do like that. Like that
So
those parts I love watching because that's a an attitude and perspective that we've kind of lost. And so I do appreciate Jess Franco and his work for doing that, kind of like, maintaining those like perspectives and beliefs.
so I
I read that scene much differently, especially at the end of the film or towards the end of the film, was because he did a really interesting thing, Franco, where there's that scene where Klaus Kinski's first introduced and he first meets her, and they're in that room and everyone's sitting still, like
Yeah.
time has stopped, and it didn't read to me as like some sort of scene where like time has it read more to me that like this is stale and decadent, that this is like some sort of just dead, this is dead space. And then when he applied the same thing again with like hip cool people, it came off to me of like a very thing of like this hippie movement, free love, it didn't get very far out from there. We
Yeah.
might look and dress differently and speak some cooler
yes,
language,
see,
but we're still as decadent as these bourgeois bastards we're trying to go again.
yeah, and it's funny, the scene for me where both of your perspectives weirdly come together was I have in my notes, wow, this has gone full on counterculture, lesbian makeout art session.
Yeah, it's
Right?
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
that scene, it's all there. It's like there's that energy, there's that experimental stuff, but it's like it takes place, as you said, Paul, in this very decadent, very sort of weird. And there's also Paul Mueller's character seems very insignificant, the club owner, but he is actually in some ways, I think, a little integral because he's this weird, like middle. And again, the guy who dubbed his voice, it was just odd, but maybe because the character's odd, he plays the role kind of almost like Franco does as like the weird. In this case, middle class. Franco wasn't necessarily middle class, but middle class, middle-aged voyeur.
Hmm.
Like he's always there when something's about to kick off.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, now that we're on the topic of the counterculture, holy hell, you know exactly what this film's audience, who this film's audience was, trying to sell this to. This is, peak 1968. Censorship is starting to change throughout the world. And it's one of those attempts, and I think it's one of the better attempts of a film at this time where it's taking the sort of out there counterculture, art housey stuff, but also commercial, tried and true exploitation film tropes and trying to marry it together. And in that sense, I think this film does a pretty good job of that. Because sometimes you see films that attempt to do that and they aged really bad.
Yeah.
This manages, I think, in a very real way, not to do that. And I don't know why that is, because in some ways the film and the filmmakers were trying to keep this as, I don't know, topical as humanly possible because they did that thing, which again, it works, sometimes it doesn't work, where they got a pop act to be in the film.
Yeah.
Manfred Mann's in this movie, which is kind of cool. I think for some of the younger members of the audience, they're one of those groups from the time period that's sort of forgotten, uh, which I guess is sort of a shame. Uh, I like the soundtrack, and I think for a lot of Franco's better films, especially considering his interest in music, particularly jazz, the soundtrack serves as a character in the film. I don't know if you guys would agree with me on that front.
For sure.
Oh,
Yeah, I loved
absolutely.
it.
Yeah. For me, especially whenever she started, um, Wanda, when she would return, and whenever she would walk in and sort of like freak people out, there'd be that great, really eerie, like vibraphone, sort of like discordant sort of music come in and play. But even the cool jazz and the like, the free jazz that was going on was really good. I thought. Um, I was especially curious more about the whole Chet Baker thing because, like, um, I thought like the opening was very. At first I thought this was maybe a story about like um based if that was true, like if this Franco came up with a story based on Chet Baker's having this discussion with Chet Baker, the whole notion of him like digging up his trumpet after he buried it and him like it's like him burying his life, and when he puts it on the fence it's like he's on the fence about it, and he talks about how he loves playing music but he can't do it when this this woman's around him, and it's like there's a part of me where it was like I are they discussing like the ennui that comes with being a performer and kind of dredging through these like just everyday gigs, or is this guy just a prick you can't like yeah, he's blaming this woman. Oh, this woman keeps coming around and interrupting my jam. Like, no, I think you're just like really you're unfocused or something. I don't know, but it does speak to that like artistic. There's definitely, and I could tell that from his filmmaking. There's this huge thing about like artistic struggle. Like
Mhm.
we're making like I feel like Franco was that guy like shouting around like we're making a movie, damn it! Like I got
Well,
to get every shot, and like
that's
people have to
exact.
understand my vision. Like it came out in that character of somebody who's like desperate to play, but then immediately distracted with
Well,
something.
and that's the funny thing because that I think is, and you being a musician, Paul, you may have felt this at times. Uh, but in a way that's very, I think, autobiographical of Franco himself. Going back to what I was saying before, when he was focused on a project, he could do some really remarkable stuff. Part of the problem was he was all smoke and fire the first week, and then another project or something would enter his mind frame, and he'd be like, "Well, I'll start writing this next movie, or maybe I'll start shooting scenes for the next movie while I'm filming this movie that I really don't give a shit about anymore." Uh, so yeah, I actually in my notes I sort of read that as this is you know artists, creative people would get this, and particularly Franco himself. Like that kind of describes the trajectory of his career. It's like, go into a project gung ho, but then I'm already kind of filming and mentally, spiritually, ideologically have kind of moved on to the next project before it's done. And which is maybe why a lot of Franco's stuff is incredibly uneven because when he had his heart set on things, he could be quite good. When he was distracted, he kind of just he was going through the motions sometimes. Uh, we've kind of been talking around this. Yo, straight up Jazz and Dreams. Because this movie is if you want to sum this movie up, those would in two words, those would be your two words. Uh the jazz is not just a character. I think the film plays out like jazz. It's incredibly non-linear. Uh, right? And in terms of dreams or the sort of dream like space, uh, it's something which you see in a lot of Franco's movies. It'd be very easy of him to like bludgeon you over the head with this in this one. And at times he kind of does, but I think it's sort of I think it works more than it doesn't work because of the payoff at the end of the film. Uh I don't know what else you guys necessarily have to say about that, or want to interrogate that further.
No, I mean, like, it's so many of those movies had really, really, really cool jazz soundtracks. Um, but like it's got a certain kind of sound. It's not like any kind of jazz. Like
Mm.
it's, you know what I mean? Like it's very of that time. Like I feel like I could listen to that or like the Shiver of the Vampires um soundtrack, and not that they're the same, they're very different. I get that, but it's a special kind of sound.
It is, and it's funny you bring up Shiver the Vampires, which is a Jean Roland film. It's funny, both of these guys deal in the same kind of playground. Both of them, I think, did not get nearly enough credit while they were alive. Uh, I'll be honest, I prefer Roland stuff more than I prefer Franco stuff because I think it's more consistent. Uh,
110%.
it is way more consistent. But both of them, unlike a lot of the genre films we will talk on this podcast, where like the Hammer films, where yeah, monsters are metaphors, we get it, but those films are coming very much from an Anglo-Saxon and a very commercial tradition. Franco and certainly why am I drawing a blank on Homeboy's name? I'm coming off a head cold. Uh French director. We just mentioned him.
John Roland.
John Roland.
I was like, wait, is that who you're
John
talking
Roland,
about?
yeah.
Yeah.
John Roland, Homeboy. Uh you can tell there's that continental tradition going on there. And again, they operate in this all horror films in some ways are dark fairy tales. I think with both Franco and Roland, the fairy tale aspect, the dreamlike aspect, is revved up 100-fold. Uh, and while this film certainly isn't, certainly a gothic film by any means, that dreamlike, is this real? What is going on here? Is very much there. Uh, and again, it could have been done. It could have been bludgeoned over your head. I think it's handled, at least in this film, quite quite well. So, with that being said, is there anything else that you guys want to stress or talk about the film itself before we kind of give closing thoughts and wrap this baby up?
No, I mean, I think I liked it. Like I did like it. I do agree. I think it's one of his better films. Like it's one that he should definitely be remembered for. Over like Rolls Royce Baby. You know what I mean? Like I don't give a shit about
Have
that.
have, have
Like that one's a
I,
good one, you know.
I'm not gonna give anything away, but there was a time in Dina's life when Dina was subjected to a lot of his as friends. Were you subjected to like the really shitty
Yeah,
like
yeah,
so
absolutely.
like
So and like
the insidious Dr. Wong and that bullshit?
yeah, and like with Venus and Furs, like I mean, I had my original interest, like I mean, way before this podcast was because I love the Velvet Underground song, you know, like so I was like, yeah, I want to watch that. I love that song, and I do feel like the song, like I wish that the movie looked more like the song sounded. That's what I was hoping. That's my only real gripe with it is I wish it was a little bit more.
Faithful to the source material.
Yeah, but even like aesthetically, like um and that's it's I think I want a Jean Roland version of it. I love him so much and I love the way, like I love his creative direction. I love the costumes, the mood that he sets. And I think there's something about a Jess Franco film, especially with this one. Forget about his, filmography. This one, where I'm like, I'm missing that extra sexiness, like the fashion aspect of it. Um, but that being said, I still think it's one of his best. Like that, um, did you say is it Diabolical Doctor Z?
Yes.
That one I like. Um, and Vampires Lesbos. I think those are like where he really excelled.
Paul, your thoughts about how would you sum this one up? Would you recommend it? If you were to, let me say it this way, if you were to introduce Naomi to
Uh,
Jesus Franco, would this be a safe pick?
no. Uh,
Okay.
uh, no. So I thought it was an interesting film, but I didn't really like it. I have to be honest. It was a bit like it had that kind of sense of experimentation I've come across where, or at least like that sort of loose, kind of semi-lucid story that was like I had a really difficult time just like being invested and like watching. And it's like if I was on a ton of drugs or like some really good, it'd probably be awesome with like a big screen and a lot of friends. Probably be like, all right, this is like a great. Like I've seen plenty of movies like that where it's like I'm convinced, and then you watch it like when you're at back to earth and you're like, all right, it's a lot of color, but but it was like it had some really interesting themes, and it was really odd to watch Klaus Kinski be so restrained and,
Yeah,
and and kind of like act,
yeah.
like not be just like let go as a madman, but really like be this like total character. And it was an interesting cast and story behind it. I would say, and also having watched Vampires I would say this is a superior film to that. And that's my only experience with Franco so far. So it's
Wait,
one
so
for
you like
one.
Venus and Furs more than Vampires Lesbos?
I would suggest to people like watch that and Venus and first, and then maybe get into something like that.
All
But
right.
Okay.
I also found too that like with his kind of style in sexploitation and like his style of um like how he kind of used it in like this kind of loose story, it was oddly reminiscent. I don't know if this is off base, but it was oddly reminiscent of like early John Waters, where
Mm,
like that same sort of like this is just a stream of consciousness and it's going to be dirty and odd and there's going to be this
Without the
weird
comedy.
music. What's that?
Without the comedy.
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think like perhaps
Yeah.
like
yeah.
I think that'd be the biggest difference is like Waters was actually like infused with like written material and comic. Like Waters was always like a strict writer. I feel like they would have gotten along, but not in that creative sense. But like definitely a kindred spirit of like this is just a stream of consciousness trippy movie where you get to see naked people doing weird things once in a while. Like
And a little bit of subversion of these power
totally,
structures.
yeah.
But yeah, no, John Waters has structure. Franco is anti-structure. So I
In
guess
the
if
in
we've
the
determined is John Waters is a Leninist and Franco is an anarchist.
there you go. Yeah,
Okay.
that's a much better way to put it.
This is what
Okay, got
happens,
it.
but this is what happens when you listen to a podcast done by a bunch of communists. Anyway, I quite like this movie, but then again, I quite like a lot of Franco's stuff. And for me, this film, it's probably my favorite, but for me, it's the best of that, like I said, late 60s, early 70s sweet spot where he's doing some really interesting things. He has more money. Yeah, there's sexploitation, but he hasn't gone full on I need to shoot my wife having sex multiple times. If
Multiple times. multiple films throughout 20
multiple, yeah,
years.
throughout
It's like
20
it
years.
never ends with him.
Yeah. Uh, if you were to introduce Franco to someone, I am going to go. I would actually say Dina, either Dr. Orloff or the Diabolical Dr. Z, because if this person you're introducing him to likes genre stuff, I think they could get into that. Uh, and then maybe show them this. Don't show them Matumbo Sexual.
See,
Because
but that and that's the thing, like for me, like I'll watch something if it's weird. I don't care. If it doesn't have to like necessarily resonate with me. I like seeing like I like watching weird shit, and
I think we all do.
yeah, I do. But I think that my like with him, it's just maybe it's like a this is gonna sound so weird and like contradicting everything I said. But okay, in the case of Venus and Furs, it doesn't go far enough for me. I think
Hmm.
that's my problem with it. Is like it doesn't go far enough with the sex, it doesn't go far enough with the revenge, it doesn't go far enough with I mean like the aesthetics of it. Like I feel like it's weirdly toned down for him, and
And
that's
and see,
strange.
that's why I would probably be my favorite Franco film, but for
Yeah.
years I would go back and forth between this and Vampiros Lesbos
Yeah,
for
I think either of them are.
exactly those reasons, because he is revving up those same themes a lot more in Vampiros Lesbos. Uh, and you have an equally magnificent soundtrack, which I would highly recommend, especially if you're into, weird, kraut rock and jazz, uh,
Which we are.
which we are, which we all are. Uh, I would, I, I want to thank you for choosing this one, because originally I was like, I don't know quite how British this is, but then I'm like, there was British money was involved, Manfred Mann was involved. We're cool. We can do this. And look, Franco isn't everybody's cup of tea. What I will say, cycling back to Paul, what you said about taking a bunch of drugs, uh, I got into Franco when I was an undergrad and in grad school. So the scenario that you painted for our audience, set your minds back, 20 years, and that was me discovering these films for the first time. So maybe part of my love for, Jess is that kind of weird, being in some weird basement, high off my ass, drinking beer I shouldn't be drinking, watching, like She Killed an Ecstasy, and being like, this is crazy. Why does this shot linger so much? There has to be a point to this. And then you realize he just like really loved handheld cameras. So with that being said, uh, we are the Don't Go Onto the Moors podcast. Uh, we'll be back at you with, well, something a little different, a comedy the next go around. And my hope is periodically throughout the year, we'll be bringing you more shorts. I know me and Dina, it's been a time. Are going to try and continue our series of looking at, uh, sort of comparing and contrasting British genre cinema with continental and maybe even Japanese or something, genre cinema. And
Love
Paul,
it.
I know we spoke off the air about maybe talking a little bit about the intersection of music, particularly pop music like rock and roll, and
Absolutely, yeah.
cinema. So we'll figure that out too. And our producer, Stead, who unfortunately is not with us, me and him might cut an episode because, well, I know Stead through another podcast where we talk about, 11 guys on a pitch trying to put a ball in the back of a nylon net. Uh, there's a British genre film that has to deal with that's dealing with that, that's going to be released on Blu-ray in the not too distant future. So Me instead might kick it back and record a short just dealing with that. But anyway, this is Professor Matt. I've been joined, it's a pleasure to be joined by Paul, by Dina, and we will see you all in about 2 months or so. Take care and get on the YouTube page, like, comment, and subscribe. Take care, my friends.